When I say the words cEDH, where does your brain immediately go? What are you picturing right now? If I had to guess, it's a dimly lit room with questionable smells, permanent chair stains, and a table full of rude, sweaty tryhards who haven't felt joy since 2017. And honestly, you're about half right. Because while chair stains and unpleasant stenches are definitely not exclusive to competitive Commander, there is a massive stigma surrounding cEDH as a format. And the question that I want to answer today is, why? So, today, we're going to break down the most common reasons that people avoid cEDH and explain why those critiques might be just a little bit misguided. Not saying that you're wrong, but I am going to explain why cEDH is a phenomenal format worth your time, your curiosity, and a truly irresponsible amount of printer paper. If the colorful intro didn't already paint a picture, one of the first and biggest issues that people bring up with cEDH is the player base. And I'm gonna say this up front, they may have a point. When I first tried getting into the format, I posted a Karlov of the Ghost Council cEDH list, my very first deck that I built. Tons of ritual effects ad nauseum and trying to do some Bolas' Citadel, Sensei's Divining Top, and Aetherflux nonsense. And look, I thought I was cooking. I was not cooking. I posted it on Reddit and got absolutely shat on immediately. No constructive hate either, just this deck is bad and you should feel bad. Real welcoming stuff. And this right here is the first sticking point for a lot of players considering cEDH. There is a level of superiority or sweatiness or I've read more primers than you that can sometimes come off as a little mean. And while yes, cEDH is the most competitive version of Commander, does that competition automatically justify being a meanie to someone who's learning the format for the first time? I don't think so. But, and this is important, something interesting happened after I actually built a real list and started playing games. Those players were kinda awesome. Once I had a base understanding of how the format works, I started asking questions and I started making jokes. Gemstone Caverns? Yeah, we should probably ban them. Question, for your Shia combo, even though you've already won, what was my interaction window for that? And like 90% of the time, the jokes get chuckles and the questions get real answers. And to me, that's when it clicked. cEDH isn't hostile to new players, it's hostile to bad assumptions. I assumed that I understood combo lines with Karlov even though I'd never played with a cEDH deck before. I assumed that playing Orzhov without having any real answers to counter magic was going to be an effective strategy in a cEDH meta that I wasn't even familiar with. And that right there is the kicker. I simply didn't know. If you can educate yourself just a tiny bit before attempting to post a homebrew on Reddit or enter a tournament and you practice a little bit, the community is actually incredibly responsive and super helpful when it comes to refining lists, identifying weak cards, and explaining why something does or doesn't work. Can people be initially rude? Absolutely. But let's be real. The I don't believe in brackets guy, your LGS, is just as mean when he deploys a 2-card infinite against your bracket 3 deck. He just swaps a mana crypt for moral superiority.
Hey, really bad. Don't mind me just jumping in here. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the Wise Hoopo. I give Commander deck building advice focused on making sure your deck provide a more consistent experience. I just wanted to pop in and say that another thing that can be really helpful for learning any metagame focused format is mentorship. As Really Bad has been talking about, a big part of coming into this format is learning. So it can always be good to have a teacher to show you the ropes. They can help make sure that you know when your interaction windows are. They can explain decks to you when you sit down with a new pod. And they can tell you not to cut that Retraction Helix and Hordling Broodlord from your primer. It's okay. Everyone cuts them before being told what they do. Speaking of primers, that's the best boon a mentor has. They can help you cut through the complexity of the 10-page write-ups and get to the heart of what the deck offers, so you can choose where you want to start learning. This is also a call for the more experienced cEDH players. Every new player is an opportunity to show off the format. Try your best to be the mentor that helps them fall in love with cEDH and not the Redditor that turns them away.
What insightful and incredible advice from another awesome YouTuber within the Magic community. Thanks, Hoopo. Echoing what I said before and the gracious greetings of Hoopo, yes, cEDH can feel highbrow at times, especially if you're just starting out. But that attitude usually comes from a place of experience rather than from a place of gatekeeping. So the biggest recommendation I can give is this. If you're trying to get into cEDH, go into it with an open and growth-focused mindset. Before posting a list, learn a bit about the current meta and what cards or ideas are regularly seen within the format. If everyone says that a card doesn't make sense in your list, they may be onto something. If everyone says that your commander doesn't provide advantage, try to learn why. cEDH is a format of continual learning, constant flux, and sometimes brutal honesty. So ask questions and don't fear random internet opinions. Emphasize learning and try to look past some of the crassness of players. And remember, if you play cEDH, everyone has a first time playing the format. Never hurts to be a little bit sweeter. Another huge critique that I hear all the time is that cEDH lacks creativity. And to understand why people feel that way, I think we have to talk about the metagame. cEDH revolves around a dense, ever-changing meta focused on 3 archetypes in my mind: turbo, mid-range, and control and stacks, or as I like to call them, win fast, win eventually, or stop everyone and make new enemies. When building a cEDH deck, 2 things must be true. Number 1, you can threaten a win by turn 3, or number 2, you can stop a win by turn 3. That's it. That's the binary. But what does that imply? Low-costed counterspells, free mana, compact win conditions, or some combination of all 3. Low-costing meaning mana value and not the price, but don't worry, we'll get there. This immediately slashes the viable card pool. Yes, some decks like Carrick function without counterspells, but they trade disruption for speed. And that speed versus disruption trade-off is key to understanding why cEDH looks so samey from the outside.
Another thing reigning in this card pool is the meta, which are just the decks you are most likely to see at a tournament. This is actually a thing every format has. Casual Commander, it's just the decks that Gary and co bring every Friday to the LGS. And Commander players, in my experience, consistently overestimate how restrictive it is. In fact, right now on EDH Top 16, of those decks, 4 of them aren't even blue, despite the fact that cEDH is known as the Counterspells and Thassa's Oracle format. I think what happens is, just like Really Bad, new players come in wanting to brew, wanting to come up with the new wacky thing no one's seen before, and are told, hey, stop doing that. This is done from a good place. It's because if you want to brew in any format, you need to learn it first. In Casual, this is done with a precon, and an overall very lax level of play. This is also why in Casual, you don't get much better at deck building unless you really try. In cEDH, by contrast, you do this by choosing a primer, and then learning that deck very well. Not only will that allow you to understand the deck, but also what your playstyle is and the format as a whole. At this point, you can brew whatever you want, to your heart's content. I say this as a 7-year cEDH veteran who hasn't cost Thassa's Oracle even once. If you're really good at it, you can even find those diamonds in the rough. For instance, Magda is now the top monocolored commander, but I remember the first big tournament she pulled up in, and she rocked everyone's world with a 10-0 record we'd never seen before. Right now, the Amulet Titan players from Modern are working round the clock to forge the wandering minstrel of all cards into an unstoppable combo machine from the pits of Tartarus itself. And the biggest example of this are referred to as the Cradle decks, which use a card called Oboro Breeze Caller. I had not heard of this card a single time in my half-decade with this format, but legendary 60-card brewer Sam Black found it within 6 months of dedicated time to cEDH, and resurrected Thrasios from the sideshow he had become to rivaling Timna and Rograk at the top of the format once again. There is such thing as innovation to be had here, but it's arrogant to assume that you are the chosen one who will crack open the format with no experience of what you're even fighting against. First, learn to master a known good list. Then you can adjust that list to fight the format on your terms, at which point you will finally have the knowledge to trek out into the unknown that is brewing.
Look, I was going to try and follow up the Wise Hoopo section, but another very real critique is the speed of the game and the sheer amount of learning required. And yeah, that one's valid. Like the Wise Hoopo was saying earlier, it's very helpful to have someone to teach you some of the win lines and the metas that are currently existing within the format. And if you're thinking about getting into cEDH, you need to be ready for a lot of win lines, combo packages, and interaction points. This format is incredibly dense, and not everyone wants to learn why holding priority matters or where every interaction window lives. I didn't even understand passing or holding priority until I started playing cEDH. And when you've got 15 Ristic Study triggers, 4 Esper Sentinel triggers, and whatever Wan Shi Tong is doing during the stack, congratulations, you're no longer emotionally stable. But there's an upside. You don't need to know everything. You just need to be willing to ask why something happened. Understanding the stack, interaction, and learning more combos makes you a better Magic player. Full stop. Instead of blowing Lightning Greaves up on site in my Bracket 3 games, I now wait to interact with what it's trying to equip. Instead of panic responding, I understand timing. I've learned cheeky things like holding priority on my own board wipe to protect myself from it. And learning to hold priority in EDH feels illegal, like discovering a rule you weren't supposed to read. cEDH raises your game IQ like no other format. Since the combos are more compact and the lines are tighter, decks are pushed to their absolute ceiling. You see what a deck looks like when it's built to win as fast and as consistently as possible, with every card slot justified and every card in that slot pulling real weight. And once you've seen that ceiling, everything else makes more sense. And you stop evaluating decks as if they were a monolith. Once you've played a handful of games in cEDH, you begin to understand the difference between this deck can win right now and this deck can dream about a win. You know how fast a turbo strategy actually needs to be, how much counter magic and removal is enough, and what it means when a deck actually folds to a single piece of disruption. Playing cEDH gives you a ruler, a way to measure the strength of decks you choose to sit down with, instead of guessing based on vibes or merely copying a list one-to-one from EDH Rec without understanding the why. So if learning excites you, cEDH rewards it aggressively. Last but not least, we have one of the biggest sticking points with cEDH lists. I mean, what on God's green earth am I looking at right now? $400 dual lands, $500 artifacts, $100 tutors, $100 counter magic, and all of a sudden, your stack of cardboard is the equivalent of a down payment on a car. But what if I told you you didn't need to spend as much money? With cEDH having such a high price for entry, it is the format that is the most accepting of proxies. If your playgroup isn't hip to proxies in casual games, I can sometimes understand it, but does it give people the right to ice you out from cEDH games? Not in the slightest. These are some of my current proxies within my cEDH list. Sure, some of them look like the original cards, but I also have some that are simply drawn by hand. In cEDH, people want to have as competitive of a game as possible, and being priced out of it isn't necessarily an issue that the community gripes with. Hell, I've seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure proxy lists in person and no one batted an eye. Price should not restrict your card pool in cEDH, and I don't think it ever will. Most tournaments are proxy friendly, and if you're focused on learning the game, buying a $500 Grim Monolith simply isn't in the cards if you're deciding whether or not you even want it in the deck. So the remedy to spending $2.5 million on Magic? Use printer paper, or a cool service that'll print out your cards. And if your playgroup is vehemently against proxies as a whole, inspect their personal finances. I promise yours will be better. Alright, I couldn't necessarily fit these into their own section, so now I'll be going into some other issues that I've heard been brought up about cEDH. Number one is that your playgroup simply doesn't want to play the format. Nope. I would ask why, and then point them to this video. Just kidding. I would emphasize proxying a list and the different styles of play that different commanders offer. Point them towards websites like EDH Top 16 to draw inspiration and be as open to their thoughts as possible. If your playgroup doesn't want to do it, you can't force them by any stretch of the imagination. But if you still feel yourself wanting to play cEDH, I'd recommend Spell Table or Tabletop Sim. It's an awesome way to get connected to other folks, and I found that people are very nice in either explaining their wins or explaining windows of opportunity for interaction. The biggest downside of Spell Table is the requirement of having a PC and the camera and the whole setup, as well as the sometimes questionable open hands and draws of opponents. Please shuffle on camera if you're on Spell Table. The next issue is that Commander, by nature, is a random format with 100 cards. And I hear you. With 100 cards in your deck, you need to see very specific pieces in your hand in order to push for a win or control the game. However, this is where the power of a mulligan comes to fruition. In no other format have I learned how to mulligan better than in cEDH. And while it's dependent on commander and strategy, the art of the mulligan is one that should not be overlooked. Not only will you learn what the main lines of your deck are faster, but you'll also learn what pieces you may need to add more or less of, as usually your games are shorter than EDH games. Mulligans are key for not only learning your deck, but learning how to stop other people's decks, and that expertise of mulligans can be extended toward casual games as well, as you start learning about what hands can lend itself to your strategy. cEDH is a format defined by being played at the highest power. At face value, if this is not something that interests you, then cEDH may not be the format for you. However, I do firmly believe that I think you should at least proxy up a list and give it an honest shot. While the community can be crass sometimes and the learning is frankly a ton, the benefits that you'll gain are drastic. You become a better deck builder as you can judge individual card importance at a higher rate, and your game IQ becomes second to none. Further, these games can sometimes take less time than a casual bracket 3 game. I love sitting with my usual pot and starting our Commander night with a couple games of cEDH, as they can range anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours, which compared to some of the 5-hour slogfests of Commander can sometimes feel like a breath of fresh air. At face value, cEDH is a format with a lot going into it, but with an open mindset and either a spell table setup or enough begging and pleading your pod, I firmly believe that there is a lot to gain. At the end of the day, maybe I just like playing with higher power. And is that such a bad thing? I think that's for you to decide and try for yourself. So thank you for watching another one of my really bad videos. I hope to at least some degree it inspired you to give cEDH a shot. If you like what I do, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave all of your gripes with cEDH in the comments below, or why you think more people should be playing it. I'm always here to hear your thoughts and incite violence in my comment sections. And if you thought that the celebrity appearance from the wise Hoopo did indeed confirm how wise he was, well, guess what? He has his own YouTube channel, and I would highly recommend checking out his content, as they are just as intuitive and nuanced as his analysis was for today's video. His links will be in the bio below. And if you want to go above and beyond, use code REALLYBAD when you're picking up sleeves, playmats, or the super cool Commander Sanctuary from Nerd Gear. But maybe you want to make it rain on me personally. I have a Patreon with a couple awesome benefits, including but not limited to a live deck tech for your deck that I'll be picking apart on live on my channel at the end of every single month, as well as giving shoutouts for you lovely, lovely patrons. And if you want to participate in cool polls and chat with other awesome people who happen to be really bad at Magic, check out the Discord. Promise, it's super awesome. Thank you all for always supporting my channel. Keep being good, and I'll see you folks next week. Bye! Almost cotton.
Dangerina 669.